Stinky Ape Summer. Stinky Ape Summer. Hello and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I am Adam.
Adam, hello. Where's your better half?
You know what? He is busy at the moment. He's actually at work. Can you imagine that? He's the breadwinner today.
I'm at work too, but this is my work. And
It's all our work.
This work that I'm doing is our third live Stinky Ape Summer installment for 2025. And we always have an episode for the Xbox Showcase to cover Rare, and usually that ends in disappointment and heartbreak. Or at the very least, discouragement and heartbreak. But then we always have an episode for the Nintendo Direct, because we have to cover Nintendo, because Donkey Kong might show up. And then sometimes, when they have something to show off during the video game announcement season, we'll do an episode for Playtonic. And ordinarily, that would be a treat. Ordinarily, I would be ready to kick back and have a joyful discussion with one of my colleagues about what Playtonic has cooking up in their kitchen. But right now, what they have cooking up might be giving us food poisoning, and we might be purging a little bit. Some negativity we need to get out on this episode. We've been putting this off for a while now, but oh boy, it is time. And you got the short straw. Congratulations, by the way.
Why, thank you. I'm very honored. But yes, unfortunately, unlike last time that I was on here, we won't be having that much fun, I guess, necessarily. This Stinky Ape Summer is a bit rancid and humid today.
Yeah, we are, as I said, we're doing this live, and normally these live episodes are for a very giddy experience. Like, oh my god, they just announced that Diddy and Funky Kong are coming to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Or, oh my god, they just announced the new Donkey Kong game at long last. That's what these episodes are normally designed to do, and why we do them live. They're not normally complete downers. So, it was last year, of course, that we did one of these with Malik. And we discussed Playtonic's announcement for Yooka-Replaylee, their enhanced remake of the original Yooka-Laylee. Their attempt to go back and fix the mistakes, both self-inflicted and those brought on by the pressures and the crunch of that Kickstarter campaign back in 2016, 2017, and when it was in development. And kind of elevate their inaugural game to a quality more comparable and more befitting of Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair, their sophomore attempt that was met with rapturous adulation by the fans. Now, even though that it was well received by those who were still within the cult of Playtonic and Rare and the DKU, it kind of went under the radar. Partially because the reaction and response to the much more hyped Yooka-Laylee was fairly lukewarm. And, I like Yooka-Laylee, for the record. Like, I have my issues with it and I see the flaws. But I've been on record as saying, when it comes to 3D platformers, I'll actually reach for the original Yooka-Laylee more than I will Donkey Kong 64. And that's not me personally speaking. I know you differ on this, but it's not me saying I dislike Donkey Kong 64 all around. I'm just thinking, for me, for pure, like, gameplay experiences, I think Yooka-Laylee is a more enjoyable experience. Not to say I can't enjoy things from DK64. You know, it's not really a competition. We love them all here. But I do enjoy a lot of what that game did. But yes, it does and can be tightened up a great deal. And, you know, the announcement of Yooka-Replaylee was kind of met with, again, mixed response, because some people were like, all right, I can understand that. Yeah, I'm all for that. While other people were just hoping that it was going to be their next all-new game, be it Yooka-Laylee or something entirely different.
I definitely get that. I guess for just a little bit of background, I was a bit in that boat as well when the game was first announced. Obviously after waiting nearly 5 years for another Playtonic game since Impossible Lair back in 2019, it at first was a bit deflating for me just personally to see hey, we're doing Yooka-Laylee again, while at the same time, trying to be a bit more open-minded and be like, well, okay, obviously, I don't think I've necessarily made it a secret that on the DK Vine staff, I'm not the biggest number one fan of the original Yooka-Laylee, but I do still really love what Playtonic is trying to do and put out there. And, obviously, I know they're capable of great things because Impossible Lair is a great thing, just legitimately, just plain. So, yeah. If anyone can fix the game, maybe not completely, because I do feel like there are still some cores of the game itself that maybe can't necessarily be completely fixed, but if you can get it to a place that is much more better, then yeah, of course, by all means, give it a try, Mm-hmm. What do you have to lose?
Well, we'll get into that, but no, since the release of Impossible Lair, and like you said, there was basically 5 years between the announcement of Yooka-Laylee and Impossible Lair and the announcement of Yooka-Replaylee. It was a big 5-year window that in that time we had the pandemic, which of course really affected the entire industry in ways that I don't think a lot of gamers are even cognizant of to this day, how much it slowed things down, how much it really put a wrench in a lot of these studios and companies' plans. I mean, Donkey Kong Bonanza itself was no doubt affected, that long stretch of time where it's like, where's Donkey Kong? Well, we did have a pandemic that shut everything down for the better part of a year. So, that being said, since late 2019, Playtonic has been aggressively expanding, we'll say. Coming out of the other side of COVID, they announced that they would be pursuing publishing in February 2021 with the launch of Playtonic Friends, kind of their own little indie publishing label where they'd be putting out games made by other, even smaller indie studios with less resources than them. And then in October of that year, studio head Gavin Price announced that they would be expanding Playtonic internally to 3 dev teams with the plan to release 1 game per year. Now, November of that year, we found out how Gavin Price intended to make that happen by having controversial tech giant Tencent purchase a minority stake in the company. And this was the moment where a lot of us were like, really?
The collar tugging commenced here.
Yeah, and I am at my heart, despite being somebody who suffers from bipolar 2, and I have my moments of dreariness for sure, I am at my heart, in my deepest core, an optimist. I am somebody who will always try to look at that glass half full before I succumb to the reality that it is actually nearing empty. And so, at the time, I was like gauging the response from people at Playtonic, from sources at Playtonic, and overall, the enthusiasm and the optimism was high, even with, Tencent getting their tendrils in Playtonic, because Tencent does, I guess, invest in quite a lot. And the idea was they won't be, at least at first, affecting Playtonic's quality control, what they want to make. It's basically just a way for them to get their stinky fingers in the pie. And so I didn't like it, obviously, but I mean, I'm just a fan on the outside looking in. So I was like, wait and see. And if it can help Playtonic actually grow to be what they want to be, and it sounded like what they wanted to be was basically 90s Rare in a modern context. I mean, the amount of confidence Gavin Price had when talking with like the trade and like industry press about this, I was like, I love to see it. And I would love for it to come true. So we waited. And we got some great Playtonic Friends releases along the way. Demon Turf was the first one, and I think one of the most successful. And then we had Little Gator Game coming out to great acclaim, and recently Dunk Dunk, which Jeff and I adore.
I have not been able to grab a copy of Dunk Dunk yet, but I can say from experience that both Demon Turf and Little Gator Game are absolutely fantastic. In fact, Little Gator Game itself is getting a very big surprise DLC this year, which I am also very excited about. Yeah.
Demon Turf is getting the full-fledged sequel, Demon Tides, albeit not published by Playtonic Friends. So it's been a real boon for a lot of smaller indie studios to have that spotlight. And it's introduced me to a lot of great indie titles that my cloistered ass, off in the DKU wilderness would have never been exposed to otherwise. So yeah, so far so good. In March of 2022, they opened a secondary workspace in Leamington Spa. And then, November 2023, they had grown to 55 employees, up from the original 6 when the studio was founded in 2015.
That's more than I can count on both my hands. That's pretty impressive.
It was impressive for the time. Sure, we'll see if that holds up. Spoilers, it won't. Earlier this year, then, they opened a lavish new studio in Burton-upon-Trent. They moved out of the office park they had been in since their founding, and they were in a new state-of-the-art modern gaming studio. And from the outside looking in, everything painted a picture of this little indie studio that could, with some wise financial choices, have been able to persevere in the face of an industry that has been in free fall for the last several years. And I wanted to believe. I was a little Fox Mulder-ish, I'll admit. As a fan of so many of the people at Playtonic, not just the founders who came from Rare, but the people they brought on since, I was rooting for them. Yeah, I'm still rooting for them in a sense.
So that's it, Hyle, right? Happy ending?
If only. There's no happy endings in this Leamington Spa, let me tell you. It didn't hurt. Fans were also liking what they were seeing from Yooka-Replaylee. Even if you were a little on the fence about the announcement, it's been 5 years and we're just getting a George Lucas-fied special edition of the original game. Even if you were on the fence, everything we've been seeing about Yooka-Replaylee since last June has been, I think, a source of optimism. Especially when we learned that Yooka-Replaylee was almost being used as a sort of training ground for their recent hires and for their younger staffers, their junior employees in, their video game dev parlance, being schooled at the knee of the rare veterans who founded the studio. And it was like, yeah, you know what? We're building up the next generation to make games like they made at Rare in the 90s. This is great. This is exactly what I wanted when Playtonic first founded in 2015, before we even knew what Yooka-Laylee was, when it was just Project Yooka-Laylee, spelled like the instrument. So all was going well, right? In February, Playtonic showed off Rextro Bites Back, their complete rethink of the much maligned Rextro arcade games from the original Yooka-Laylee. And I mean, that was just like, hell yeah. Even if they can't fix all of the issues of the original Yooka-Laylee, they are targeting some of the biggest ones. And doing so in such a fun, colorful, fan-pleasing way. Okay. So, in March, they unveiled a new preview trailer called the Kinda Funny Showcase, narrated by senior community manager Steve James, and that's not the last time we're going to bring him up in this episode, that explained the conceit behind this enhanced remake, this redo of Yooka-Replaylee. And then the next day, it was officially announced that PM Studios would be co-publishing the game with Playtonic Friends, serving as Playtonic's new partner after Team 17, and ensuring that the game would have a wide distribution across all platforms, which would mean things like physical copies. Okay, so that brings us up to when Cameron and I did our Kongversation this season on Yooka-Replaylee, taking a detour with Yooka-Replaylee. And we were like, yeah, you know what? We were all excited about Donkey Kong Bonanza, but there's this other 3D platformer that we're really jazzed about. Playtonic has said it will be released in 2025. And we were so optimistic on that episode. And why not? I mean, the game looked great. The studio had grown significantly. And even if we were kind of preoccupied with Donkey Kong Bonanza, it was nice to know that after Bonanza's hype and hoopla died down, we would still have Yooka-Replaylee to look forward to. And I guess we still do. That hasn't changed.
It definitely seemed like for one of the first times in, who knows how many years it's been, that it could have been like, it seemed that the three main branches of the DKU, Rare, Donkey Kong, and Playtonic, all three would sort of have their own space to thrive and start growing after a period of inactivity in all three parts. And that seems like an exciting thing, having this active of, a community after lots of years of, silence and lots of waiting.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the joke, since at least the buyout era, is that we cannot have all corners of the DKU operating at full capacity at any given time. Whenever Rare is having a hot streak, Donkey Kong goes into hibernation. Whenever Donkey Kong is roaring to go, Rare is kind of lost in the weeds. And, we have Playtonic now. Playtonic came about as part of that Renaissance era that we have coined. And Playtonic has been a bright spot since their founding. I mean, no matter what you may think of the original Yooka-Laylee, it was a source of a lot of hype and a lot of speculation and a lot of anticipation. And even if that did disappoint, Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair, that was just one of the best 2D platformers I've ever played. And as a fan of Donkey Kong Country and a fan of Playtonic even, it just ticked all these boxes that hadn't been ticked in a long, long time.
As much as I'm like a critic of Yooka-Replaylee, I will be the first to say that if it wasn't for Yooka-Replaylee and Playtonic, I would not be here on this episode or in this community talking to you right now. You know, I briefly touched upon it in the last episode that I guested in, but like this year marks 10 years of me being with DK Vine. And it was all thanks to Playtonic and Project Yooka-Replaylee and you and Chad's interview with Chris Sutherland at the time that got me much more excited to know more about the game. And, you know, I had missed the window on backing it on Kickstarter, but I did pre-order it before launch. So I was still there day one to sort of usher in this new era. And with all of you to boot, you know, one of my first Kongversation episodes was talking with you right here about Glitter Glaze Glacier and how even though I had problems with the game, like I think that's one of the strongest worlds. And I was just excited to talk to other people about it.
Yeah, I mean, I look back at that period of our website, of our community, and just how many connections we made at that time, how many people came in because of our interview with Chris Sutherland, because of Project Yooka-Replaylee. And yeah, I mean, like I said, it's been a bright spot. It's been something that has kept us going, helped keep our website and community going right when Donkey Kong was entering its long development hell, post-tropical freeze. And so I've always rooted for Playtonic. I've always been a fan, even when I've been kind of disappointed with something. And I did generally like Yooka-Replaylee. It just wasn't, you know, this amazing second coming of Banjo-Kazooie. It had its problems. It had its compromises that kind of held it back in a lot of areas. But I can't imagine my profession or doing DK Vine without Playtonic around at this point. You know, it's made all the difference, and it's kind of helped take that pressure off the other part of my brain that's like looking over at Rare and being like, where the hell is Banjo? Where the hell is Banjo-Kazooie? Because I'm enjoying just watching Playtonic, and I'm also really enjoying Sea of Thieves. It kind of helped me unclench my asshole a little bit and really appreciate Sea of Thieves. So it's been a net win for everyone. So, of course, the come down, the wheels coming off. Basically, a little over a month after Donkey Kong Bonanza. We had like a month of everything singing and humming along nicely. But May 9th, the warning signs set in. Steve James, community manager, left Playtonic. Now, at the time, this just felt like a blow. It didn't feel like any cause for genuine concern. Now, Steve was perhaps the most prolific person in this role since Daley Johnson, who had moved into game design, the reason they stepped down. And Steve had done a lot to engage with the Playtonic community, or I should say re-engage Playtonic with the Playtonic community, took the initiative to have Playtonic move over to Blue Sky and treat that as a like equivalent platform, which was really appreciated by so many people in the community who no longer felt welcome on the former Twitter. And like really helped establish Playtonic's Discord to really have that direct connection with their most loyal fans. So seeing Steve step down, I was worried just because he had done such a great job in that role. And I was like, how are you letting him get away? But still, you know, people come and go in this industry, no matter the loyalty fans have towards these studios, these characters, these brands even. To a lot of the people in the industry, it's a job that puts food on the table. And sometimes you have to leave jobs, even jobs you like, if a better opportunity comes along. And so it was just like, okay, well, good for Steve. I hope he, is met with great success in his future endeavors. Life goes on, and I didn't really think much of it that time other than I'm really sorry to see him go. And I actually made a point to let him know that. I was like, hey, just speaking as somebody who's an asshole looking in from the outside, I think you've done a great job. So gotta let people know when you appreciate them, Life is short.
Yeah, of course.
Sand through the hourglass and what have you. But then came Black Wednesday, May 21st. Rumblings on social media about layoffs happening or that were imminent at Playtonic. And my first indication was Ed Bryan just vague posting on Blue Sky, a post that said heartbreaking. And given our current climate of world affairs, could be referring to anything. And I was just like, oh shit, I need to check the news. Something bad has happened in the last hour compared to what has, the bad stuff that happened this morning. But then it was clear that he was referring to something happening at Playtonic. Steve James, no longer at Playtonic, commented on Blue Sky, "Should be a week of happiness and positivity for me, but instead I'm sad, angry, and concerned for my former colleagues. Many talented folks at risk of redundancy at Playtonic. If you see them posting for jobs, please help them out. They deserve to land at excellent places." And, that's not what you want to see as a champion of a particular studio, particularly when the studio is trying to build hype for this new, or in this case, rebooted, big, lavish 3D platformer that was built on the hard work of a lot of these people who were suddenly at risk of redundancy.
I would say doubly so, especially for a studio like Playtonic, which even came about due to the fact that these people formed the studio due to essentially being made redundant by a big reorganization of another company from their prior management.
Believe me, the irony is not lost on anybody. And that meant over the next 9 days, I was having to follow this terrible story and trying to find out what I could. And ultimately came to learn that upwards of 17 staffers were let go. And I say upwards because that is just the most recent figure that has been quoted to me. If anybody else has been let go in greater numbers, I am not aware of it. But 17 staffers let go. Most of those fired. And yes, they were fired. I mean, that's essentially what it was. We can gussy it up in polite terminology like redundancy all we want. These are layoffs. These are cold, brutal cuts. Those fired were not those in senior positions. And also the coding department was also apparently spared.
17 out of the 55 that were working there, that's nearly a quarter, that's still about 25% of a workforce gone. And, that's absolutely horrifying.
It is. It doesn't sound like a lot when you just put it in those numbers, 17. These were all making up a significant percentage of that dream of 3 concurrent dev teams, 1 game per year, moving to this big new studio to accommodate everybody. Yeah, that's out the window now, isn't it? So I like saying in it. I learned when I was talking with Matt that it's fun to say. And I'm trying to help get me through this episode no matter how I'm also drinking right now. And I've never promoted a lifestyle of sobriety, but I am drinking the pain away on this episode. So thank you to the good folks at Bold Rock Hard Cider. So, yes. What really makes this just a bucket of suck is that these were the younger, maybe less experienced game developers who are nonetheless doing so much for Yooka-Replaylee that were being trained by these legacy former Rare staffers. And like I said, ensuring that the games made that vintage Rare way that we all love and adore would maybe carry over into the next generation. All of that is now set on fire.
Not only that, but, we've mentioned it, like, some of these people we know personally. They're from the community. They have interacted with DK Vine. They were just like us, grew up playing these games, hoping to one day, work alongside these people. And for a brief moment, like, that came to fruition. They were working with, like, the people that had, like, inspired them to be in the industry. And, like, it's just all the more, it's all the more upsetting for this to happen, for it all to come crashing down in one evening.
Yeah, and I'm trying to be as dispassionate as I can, like trying to retain any bit of journalistic integrity I can and not think of it in those terms. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it is a lot of people we knew. And if a couple timelines over, I might be among them. I could see myself, working at Playtonic and, living the dream. And then all of a sudden being told, we have to let you go because we overextended our budget. It's just miserable. So what happened? How did we get here? And what the hell does this mean for Yooka-Replaylee and Playtonic's future? Well, we'll get into that as well as the recently released Yooka-Replaylee demo on Steam. Yes. We are live streaming this, as I mentioned. Maybe not the best idea to live stream this episode on twitch.tv/DKVine. Maybe it's a little tacky. Maybe it's a little bit gauche to, like, say, hey, we're live streaming this disaster, come and gawk. But, I mean, tradition, what have you. We are here to talk about the Yooka-Replaylee demo at the core of this, but we can't talk about that without mostly talking about what's happening at Playtonic right now. And hello to everyone who has joined us on this fine evening. Traveler of the Stars, Terminally Online 2024, Quirtykins, we have Freezer in there. We have Bay and the Bear. We have Muminfi. Hello. Yeah. Gigastrike. Hello. Yeah. Terminally Online says election coverage is always live. I think you're covered on the disaster front. Yeah, this is probably the most dour we are going to get this Stinky Ape summer. We're also going to discuss some positive things, stuff we like about the demo, maybe a little bit of hope wrapped in this kernel of poo. I don't know.
I mean, when we both took the oath as Donkey Kong journalists, for better and for worse, and boy, have we seen some worse days in our lives, but we just got to take those worst days with the good days. But unfortunately, it is a worse day today.
I know I unofficially officiated your wedding, but I don't remember sneaking that in there, making you take your wedding oaths on Donkey Kong journalism.
Oh, we did that prior. Once okay. We were finally officially indoctrinated into the staff. That was obviously years prior, back in 2017. Unfortunately for us, when you take an oath to become a Donkey Kong journalist, you don't really need to renew it. It's sort of got a lifetime guarantee.
Yeah, it's like herpes in that way.
Yeah, it just never goes away, you know. You can try to pretend it's not there, but it'll catch up with you later. You'll get a little cold sore in the bottom left of your mouth. It'll stay there for a couple days until you acknowledge it.
Yeah. So consider this episode our Valtrax. I don't know.
Sure.
What? Just rub it all over.
Yes.
So
rub it all over, sleep through the pain. It's your choice.
Last Saturday, June 7th, Playtonic released a Yooka-Replaylee demo on Steam. This was announced 1 year to the day. They announced it the day before, so 1 year to the day that Yooka-Replaylee was revealed. And so, I don't know if this had been in the works or not, or if it was kind of, we gotta shift attention away from the layoffs. We gotta shift, some positivity back on our brand. I don't know. But the demo focuses on the game's prologue, basically everything leading up to the first world. And it really lets us see how Playtonic is in many ways completely reimagining the experience, at least the onset of the Yooka-Laylee adventure. It centers much of the action in a completely new area underneath Shipwreck Creek, a cavern that connects to Hivory Towers. And then they've also tacked on a level from Rextro Bites Back at the very end of the demo. And, so I was out on my bear hike when they announced this. And I came off the mountain. I went to buy a physical copy of Mario Kart World since FedEx had lost mine in another state. And I saw that the Yooka-Replaylee demo was coming the next day. And I just kind of sighed. I'm going to be honest, it's a very dispiriting moment to talk, think, or engage with anything related to Playtonic, at least in the current sense of the studio or their output. And even doing things like writing articles for DK Vinyl, having to come home then and write an article, however brief, however perfunctory, about, hey, Playtonic's gonna have a Yooka-Replaylee demo on Steam tomorrow. Even that feels like I have to walk a tightrope. And that's kind of...
It should be a celebration, It's like, hey, that game we've all been looking forward to, that game that, Playtonic has, for the most part, aside from a couple of, handful of clips, they've kept it mostly in the dark. This should be exciting. We get to get our hands on it. Everyone technically gets to have a try at getting their hands on this game, see how it plays, what's new, what's different, Yeah. It should be a great time to be excited. A little something to tide us over, to get excited for the game, and, a little bit of a distraction while we wait a couple more weeks for Donkey Kong to get his big day, Mm-hmm. All should be good. Instead, you're right, Hyle, it's just kind of like a sort of a grim cloud hanging over this now, And like you said, we don't know if they specifically had this planned as a 1 year anniversary thing, or if this had all been just a smokescreen to kind of distract from the fact that people are still upset about the layoffs and how, the Playtonic has handled it. They really didn't attempt to talk about the layoffs until 2 weeks later, and even then they really did below bare minimum to, talk about it.
Yeah,
and it just feels bad.
It was particularly 9 days after it was the layoff started on a Wednesday, and it was the next Friday. And of course, whenever a company releases anything on a Friday, they're really hoping people don't see it. It's the Friday night news dump is what it's referred to as, when a studio or company or corporation puts out bad news because people are going to be starting their weekend and they're going to be starting to disengage. So they technically got it out there, but it was a prepared statement, and it was kind of just blaming the state of the industry and oh, how sad this is. And look, for the record, I just want to point out I am not trying to paint anyone still at Playtonic or everyone still at Playtonic as a villain here. We have learned quite a bit, and some stuff I am not really like supposed to talk about, but I do know that vast majority of the people still at Playtonic are heartbroken and aghast at what has happened.
I don't think it's any secret that Ed Bryan himself's been very, very upset about this. Yeah. He's been the most vocal out of a lot of the senior staff members, because I would think that, you know, he's kind of experienced this firsthand, and he's upset that it's happening to a place that he loves, that he thought, you know, would be safe from something like this, you know. It's Nosy Crow was probably something really difficult when that happened. So to kind of have it happen again, you know, that it's not a fun thing. It would get me upset personally. I'd be furious, just like him.
Yeah, so like this isn't us saying like, oh, knives out for Chris Sutherland. That like, no, like. They are going through it too, and the only thing is, you know, they're still in the trenches, and they've just lost so many of their fellow soldiers, and through no decision-making of their own. So, like, this isn't me trying to paint the entire organization of Playtonic Studios as the villain, okay? I just want to be clear. We are so eager to have such like stark dividing lines. And truthfully, I think it lies more at the hands of one or two individuals, more than anything. And even then it was just poor decision making, hubris, maybe. But I would feel like a heel writing these articles where I was talking about Yooka-Replaylee, because yeah, like that personal aspect of, I know some of these people. I consider some of these people dear friends. And it was just like, and here I am writing an article about the Yooka-Replaylee demo coming out, which again, I mean, it's my job. I fucking have to do it. But I did like feel like I have to strike just the right balance of tone in these articles. Don't use exclamation marks. You know, don't you dare be excited about this, Hyle. And I think what helped me a little bit was Daily, coming forward on social media about the demo and saying that they wanted people to play the demo, and they hoped people enjoyed Yooka-Replaylee because they were proud of the hard work that went into it from their end and their fellow colleagues who were laid off. And that kind of like sort of gave me in my brain a little bit more space to operate, a little bit like I didn't feel like such a conniving asshole, you know, trading off of Yooka-Replaylee at the like very real situation of people losing their jobs and kind of the dumpster fire progressing at Playtonic at the moment. So, part of the reason why we haven't really talked about this yet on the conversation at great length is I didn't know how we were going to really address it in a manner that I felt befitting, but also trying to keep level head about it. And I didn't also want to come across as profiting off of this bad news. And I knew we'd have to get around to it eventually. And I think the demo also just opened up the avenue of we have an in where we are talking about the demo, but that also means we have to talk about everything else. So that was my kind of shattered psyche over the past couple of weeks when it comes to Playtonic. I was like, well, Jeff and I are going to talk about Dunk Dunk first. But of course, you know, let's not blame Badger Hammer about what's happening in Playtonic. It's not their fault.
How dare you, Badger Hammer? Have you no shame?
Developing.
You can release your small indie game you worked so hard on? You think you can just stroll up and release a game like that? Well, let me tell you, you absolutely can. And I'm so proud of you. Playtonic, on the other hand, we got to talk to you a little later, bud. See me after class.
Yeah, developing this game for 7 years and waiting for the right moment to release it just before 17 staffers at Playtonic are released. For shame. So, Adam, let's talk about the demo a little bit. And I know it's kind of hard to talk about it in light of everything else, but I think, again, I do like the idea of celebrating what the people who both were laid off and the people who are still there who hold no fault for any of this on their own. I do want to support those people still, and I want to celebrate what the people who were laid off did. And I know, like, not everybody's going to feel this way, and we can't tell anybody how to think about this. I mean, that's your own moral arc to kind of navigate, but like, that's where I'm at right now. Is it would be a shame if we couldn't engage and really see the fine work these people did. And yeah, you know, it's not going to be a situation we can all agree on or come to some kind of like unified understanding, but that's where I'm approaching it.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess before, if anyone's listening to this podcast that's in the industry, you know, these people that are laid off from Playtonic, you know, they are amazing people. Like, if you are the person who is able to pick up daily for your company, any sort of studio or company, like, you are an incredibly lucky person. I don't think there is anyone else out there like Daily who's as go-getting and just like consistently ready to kill it, you know? And I think we can talk a little bit about that because, you know, you can feel a lot of Daily and her team that was helping work on this game. You can feel their passion. You can feel their love for these characters and for the gameplay. And, you know, it makes it all the more upsetting on what happened. But, like, just once we get into talking about the demo, you know, it really is something that's really special that you can tell that everyone who worked on it really put their whole ass into.
Yeah, I don't think I'm out of turn saying this. This is, like, stuff we've learned in recent years, but just when Playtonic got the infusion of cash and they were trying to figure out, like, where do we redirect all of this? Where do we go next? There was some internal debate about maybe we just don't do a Yooka-Replaylee game. Maybe we don't do Yooka-Replaylee. And it was a lot of the younger staff who really fought for Yooka-Replaylee and eventually led to Yooka-Replaylee because of their love for the characters and the world that Playtonic was building already. And you can definitely see that passion, that reverence even in this short demo. And yeah, and I think melancholy is the word I'm going to keep coming back to because that is what I felt playing this. Melancholy. I felt so many pangs of sadness for what Playtonic has now lost. Because this is so good. Because I very, very much adore the direction they're taking Yooka-Replaylee. And I'm sure Yooka-Replaylee, if it holds up, if it releases as scheduled, if, you know, the work isn't shunted aside, I'm sure it, you know, the overall quality will hopefully be as amazing as I found this demo. And that won't change, and that will be like a time capsule. But as far as like building off of this, which was the other like big selling point of Yooka-Replaylee in my mind, was there's more coming. You know, this isn't just Playtonic's been working on a ukulele reboot for 5 years. No, this is just the opening salvo in a new game after new game after new game. And this is just our first stepping stone towards a cascading ladder of excitement. I don't know. I'm mixing my metaphors here, but it's lost now. We don't know what the future entails. And so much of that charm, so much of that personality that people like Daly infused into Playtonic, you can't get that back. That doesn't just come out of nowhere, out of a vacuum. That comes from the people you just laid off. Sucks. It sucks. But, yes, I really did like this demo. I was not expecting like really anything that we got in this demo. It took me by surprise to see how much they are rethinking, at the very least, the intro of the game. And there's even a prologue now where like it didn't really exist before. We were just dumped into Yooka-Replaylee's world, or their corner of the world, depending on your point of view. And we didn't know who this lizard and bat were. They were just hanging out in Shipwreck Creek. They had just renovated the shipwreck that they were living in. And there was a evil factory corporation right next to them. Okay. All right. But this new intro is presented like in a storybook style, but like a journal, or I don't know. It's a hand-drawn map.
You could almost call it like, it's almost kind of like a storybook opening, you know? And like, I'll say this, one of my biggest problems personally with the original Yooka-Laylee was the fact that the game just kind of drops you into the world with no context, because even the original Banjo, you know, they're able to set up so much in such little time, you know. They set up Banjo and who he is. They set up Kazooie and who she is. They set up Bottles and Tootie. And they set up Tootie's dynamic with Banjo. They set up Gruntilda's dynamic with all the other characters. They're able to do this in such a short cutscene. And it's still such an impressive thing. And opening this demo, you know, after about a year of like mild excitement, but still like hesitance at if they can really like crack the shell and like crack the code of Yooka-Laylee, I was absolutely charmed by this intro. This is like one of the things that I think the game really needed. And all of this context added in just this brief storybook opening does so much more, not only to make Yooka and Laylee themselves much more interesting and like fun characters, but also just to set up the story in general. Cause like, the way they're telling it and like opening the book, and you've got like this nice music playing, you know, just I'm pretty sure a new arrangement from Grant, and just you have all these like album style like photos that are being overlaid, and it does have that rare charm. Part of that rare charm that I felt was kind of lacking in the original Yooka-Laylee. Like, it's there this time, you know? Yooka and Laylee aren't just like some lizard, chameleon and bat duo. They're a set of two friends. They're very close, you know? They're adventurers. They go on adventures. They find treasure, you know?
Yeah.
Laylee's not just like Kazooie now, you know, she's not just like an angrier, meaner Kazooie. She's excitable. That's the thing about Laylee. She's excitable. She jumps into things without thinking, you know. She sort of takes control even when it's not necessarily like maybe the best thing for her to do, you know. And Yuka's he you know, he's an adventurer also, you know, and he's not he's not as milquetoast as he was in the original. He also has a sense of adventure, but it's just that they're both, I think, just maybe they can bite off more than they can chew sometimes, and that's what gets them into trouble.
It really reminded me, and we just touched upon this when we were last discussing Yooka-Replaylee. It really reminded me of the personality that was brought to the characters in Yooka-Laylee and the Cracklestone. And, that was the official graphic novel by DM Cumbo, Dream Prison Press. And it did such a great job of making the characters feel like more than just Banjo-Kazooie XPs. More than just these, like, soulless carbon copies with the serial numbers filed off, like they felt in the original Yooka-Laylee. I mean, Laylee in particular, you're right. She was just basically meaner Kazooie in Yooka-Laylee. But through the work of subsequent works of art, like Cracklestone. Also, I think like that's one area where Daly did like help flesh out what Laylee is, whether or not this was the original intent behind the character or not. But Laylee is kind of like an overexcited child with zero impulse control. And Yooka is the one trying to rein her in. And like that, therein lies the comedy of the duo. And yeah, just like Bayan is in our live stream and saying that this whole thing really reminded them of the pacing of the original Banjo-Kazooie opening. It sets up the characters better and keeps things moving without too much standing around and talking. And yeah, I agree. Like, you get a feel for who these characters are in just the first minute of this than you do in the entirety of the original Yooka-Laylee. And yeah, it brings that heart and humor that we're lacking in that first game. I didn't really find anything in that first game to be genuinely funny or heartwarming or really bringing forth any sort of emotion whatsoever other than, ooh, I really like this environment. Ooh, that's nice. But I didn't care about the characters until later works. So it's nice to see that this original adventure is now retroactively being given that same kind of personality and genuine heart that it was lacking. So, love that. It did heavily retcon a lot about the original game and our understanding of the mythology, if you want to call it that. And it surprised me how much it did mess with things. And I don't think it's a bad thing, because other than a few freaks like us and the people, running the Yooka-Laylee wiki, who cares? Who cares? So I don't know how much you remember about the original plot, Adam, but it was implied that Yooka and Laylee found the shipwreck in Shipwreck Creek, and then they refurbished it. They gave it a paint job, and Laylee named it the Batship Crazy there, after it was already beached in the mountains. And how did it get up there was a mystery. Like, how is it all the way up in this kind of mountainous region? Like, what on earth could have brought this ship that far up? And then they found this mysterious one book inside its hold. One book is the MacGuffin of Yooka-Laylee. It's this all-powerful book that can rewrite the universe. If you write in it, you can change the nature of reality or time and space. And that's what capital B is after in both the original and this. But there's this mystery. Why is this all-powerful book containing everything that ever was or is or will be? Why is it in this pirate ship? What is this pirate ship doing in the mountains? What's the connection with the mysterious pirate treasure found throughout Yooka-Laylee? Well, that was never answered. We assumed it was being set up for a sequel. But now The batship crazy is just Yooka-Replaylee's ship that they sailed on to find treasure. They're treasure seekers, like so many other protagonists or antagonists in the DKU. And they crashed in Shipwreck Creek somehow. But they were the ones who did it. And then they decided to make that their home.
Yeah, even right after that cutscene, they even explain how the shipwreck gets there. They said they took 2 to 3 weeks to salvage it and, not necessarily rebuild it, but to, get it to a safer area where they could potentially rebuild it.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of sucks the mystery out of that. But again, I think the ultimate purpose of it is just to make the characters and the corner of the world they inhabit more satisfying. And I think it does that job. And by the way, the one book now, it's already in the possession of Capital B and Dr. Quack. And the intro sees Yooka-Replaylee retrieving it. And then they have a little discussion with the one book on the batship crazy. And then the one book gets sucked up by the novelizer 64 again, as happened in the original Yooka-Replaylee. But yeah, we don't know where the one book came from. It's just this mysterious thing, but it seemingly has no relation now to the shipwreck, which is interesting. It's a lot to reconcile, but it's not like fans who care about this kind of shit haven't had to do this before. It's easy to forget, but the original Banjo-Kazooie had a lot retconned out of its early backstory. Like the relationship between Mumbo and Gruntilda. Remember that? Like Mumbo training Grunty and Grunty turning to the dark side and scarring his face. Like all of that was just forgotten about when we got Grunty's revenge. And we roll with it. We preserve what we can with our headcanon. And we move on. It's ultimately not that big of a deal.
We accept it because we get a little child version of Captain Blubber in that game, and what else could we have asked for? Anything else would be insanely selfish on our part.
It's like, what are we really sacrificing? This backstory that may never be elaborated on? Well, we get we get Cap and Skeleton in Grunty's Revenge. Cap and Skeleton, one of the best DKU characters.
Are we really gonna get angry at the game that gave us beloved DKU character Alfred Peacock?
Alfred Peacock, who runs the ice cream stand Mr. Drippy's in Spiller's Harbor, right outside the Tip Top Suite. No, I am not going to turn up my nose at what is ultimately a far more meaningful experience for me, the consumer, than this vague backstory from the instruction manual of Banjo-Kazooie that we'll probably never see in action.
I guess now's a better time than any, though, to mention it, but, Hyle, there has been another retcon that you didn't mention, and that's that the one book is a character now. He's a fully fleshed out character. The one
book talked in Yooka-Replaylee and the Impossible Lair.
That's true, but now he has a full speaking role in this first game.
Well, yeah, but he's
talking with Yooka-Replaylee about being imprisoned. He's the one specifically ejecting his pages out into the wild, Yeah, more ejected, and we're even done talking about Spiller's Harbor. It's nice to say, like, we knew the one book could talk, was intelligent unto itself from Impossible Lair. So for me, that wasn't a retcon, more as just tying back what happened in later games, or the later game, back into the adventure of the first. So it was good to see. And it gives the one book more agency. It makes it more interesting. It makes the concept of pages a little bit more interesting and clarifies it a little bit more. And, I enjoyed that. And I enjoyed the new area too. The kind of rethought training ground that's a lot more engaging and feels a lot more proactive than just the lazy Shipwreck Creek of the original game. Yeah, no. The thing that this area reminds me of And I think it's definitely better than just the little space that they had to teach you, like, rolling in the original ukulele. This new underground area that leads up to Ivory Towers, it really reminds me of the original Kickstarter images that they had of, like, Yooka-Replaylee kind of in, like, an early prototype version of the game, sort of like in, like, a nondescript underground area, sort of like rolling around, and like that's not an area you see in the final game of the original ukulele. So
Yeah.
going through this new little alcove that also kind of like it also like naturally builds from like sort of a dark underground forest type area to the more like steel construction of Ivory Towers. It's a really smart and like cool way to slightly change something from the beginning, but just like flesh it out much more and just have it be there as a way to also just get you acclimated to having all of your moves at once.
Yeah, so that's, of course, one of the biggest changes. And we already knew they were doing this, or they were weighing about doing this, like leaning towards making this the reality. But yes, you do have all of your moves from the start. And in fact, this also plays into the whole retconning thing, where the one book writes it in itself that they have all their moves and then makes it reality. Which, how does that work in the context of squaring it away with the original game? Because we know the one book can change reality and has changed reality before. And so it's very possible that all these retcons are coming about because the one book is being written in by, say, Laylee in the modern day, and it's affecting the past, and this is just reality reboot upon reality reboot. But yes, you have all the moves from the start, which makes for a far more dynamic, necessitates a far more dynamic sort of training area. And like, so far, so good. I don't know how they're going to square this away with some of the earlier worlds, because I don't think they're being like reimagined that deeply as this starting area is being reimagined. But from what I played in just this demo, I really, really like this decision.
Yeah, and I will say, just like you said, I do think it's a so far so good, but I do still remain a little bit unsure about how I really feel, because out of all my problems with the original ukulele, learning moves was the least problem I had. You know, in fact, like that's one of the things I like about most of these, 3D platformers is I get to find a character in a world, they teach me a new move, I get to try out the move, and, while it can technically make for, better gameplay and ease of controls and all that, there is something that, it doesn't, we don't know how exactly different Trouser will hit now, but there is a bit of a disappointment thinking, oh, I don't get to go to Trouser for moves anymore, There's still plenty he'll be selling, but, it's one of those things where I get excited to see Trouser in a world because it's like, ooh, I get to buy some new moves and try them out, And now it's kind of like, oh, okay, it's Trouser, I'll probably go and, buy a health extender or some more energy. And, it's still good, but, it doesn't have that same feel of like discovery, like you're discovering something new and exciting by talking to him.
That being said, I think that there is an upside to it, is that whenever I go to replay like the original ukulele or even Banjo-Kazooie, which of course I adore across the board, there is this kind of frustration when you don't have all the moves after you're so well acquainted with the game and how it plays. after the point where you get all the moves and then starting over again and you can't do all the stuff that you have taken for granted. It is kind of nice to just know we'll be able to do everything from the start. I don't know if that makes for a better game per se, but as far as returning to the original game as a veteran of the first, I am kind of relieved almost that I won't have to go through that whole process again. And
no, definitely, I'm with you there because that's why I'm still I'm unsure because the amount of times you have to backtrack to Tribal Stack Tropics after you learn a new move. You're kind of doing it throughout the whole game if you play it the way where it's now that I know this move, I can go back and get that pagey. You're going to be doing that for the entire game. You're going to be going into a new world. You're going to be learning the moves. You're going to be going out, and then you're going to be going all the way back to the beginning of Ivory Towers to Tribal Stack Tropics to get that. Yeah. And up to the final world where you learn to fly, because, there is a very obvious pagey in Tribal Stack Tropics where, unless you're really cheesing the game, you're not going to get that pagey until the end.
Right. Yes. I hate that pagey. But, as far as Trouser goes, well, at least you've got those Grand Tome specific costumes you can buy from him, and I do also like how they've changed the beginning of the game, where you're now really sneaking into Ivory Towers. It's not just Trouser opening the gate for you. There actually feels like there's a little bit more weight to it, where Yooka and Lele are actually being proactive, and things aren't just being done for them by this snake traveling salesman or whatever. I like that it gives them more agency, and this whole new area is just, I think, a lot more dynamic and exciting way to start the game than the more lackadaisical original.
Definitely, one of the things that I really like the small touches of while you're going through this whole new intro sequence is that right before you get to the area where that you have the entrance to Ivory Towers, essentially, you still see a lot of little things at work underneath. You roll up a green hill into just the solid steel of Ivory Towers, and the first thing you see is all these machines hooked up to a book that's kind of just burning it through its pages and kind of sucking everything out of it, and I love that.
Yeah, there's so many great details, and it really is just that very traditional attention to world building that we love from Rare and Playtonic. Just the feeling that this is a real place, that this is more than just an obstacle course for characters to progress and overcome, but this is actually the cavern leading into this unscrupulous major corporation. I love it, and it's everything about the presentation of this and this new intro is just such a glow up. And like I said, that brings with it the melancholy when then you're then reminded of what is happening at Playtonic, and you're oh, I'm excited about this, but in our live stream, Briefluff is here. Hello. And Briefluff is talking about the new dialogue boxes. Says, I love the new dialogue boxes. Fits the book theme the franchise used, makes Yooka-Replaylee have its own identity. We've talked about this before, but I agree. Part of the problem of Yooka-Replaylee, and it was a catch-22, I understood, what they were doing. But part of the problem with the original Yooka-Laylee is that it was trying so hard to be Banjo-Kazooie, again, with the serial numbers filed off, that it forgot to find its own identity. And it wasn't until Impossible Lair, it wasn't until Cracklestone, to a lesser extent, that the characters and the corner of the world they inhabit did find their own voice at long last. And they did start feeling like more than just lame Banjo and mean Kazooie, or meaner Kazooie, and Bottles, but if he was a dick joke, and so on. But like one of the strongest elements that the original Yooka-Laylee had was that it did have a more coherent theme across the board, where you didn't have all these disparate elements like puzzle pieces, music notes, Jinjos, which we all love those, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not saying Banjo-Kazooie was wrong to include Jinjos. We love the Jinjos. But Yooka-Laylee had the whole book theming. Pages, quills, ghostwriters. That was one element, one area where Yooka-Laylee did excel over the original Banjo-Kazooie. So it's nice to see them kind of shaking off the last remnants of trying to be Banjo-Kazooie all over again and just embracing what Yooka-Laylee is and what, like, their quest is. Despite their names being a pun on an instrument, it's not about music here. It's about books and the nature of writing and, I guess, creativity and imagination and what's contained therein. And so yeah, like the dialogue boxes, I know it's controversial for some because they miss the Banjo style dialogue boxes, but I love it. I love that it has its own identity now.
What I really like about the new dialogue boxes is not only do I really like the storybook like backdrop that they have for all the dialogue boxes, but you can already tell that they've already immediately taken a lot of even feedback from earlier showings of Replaylee into this demo, because one of the things in some of the earlier versions of the Replaylee that they were showing like a year to even like 6 to 8 months ago, with the dialogue boxes, you had that nice storybook background, but the character heads were very static. They didn't move. It wasn't the original like Banjo head bobble. And in the demo, you get the best of both worlds now. You get the really nice storybook theming while also still retaining the head bobbles, which, you know, it's kind of like a staple at this point with these series. And it's like, they're, as much as it was nice to see those earlier gameplay videos, there was a little something lost by not having those head bobbles. And so it's nice to kind of just meld the two. And not only do you have something that still reminds you of Banjo, but is still doing something to make itself set apart from that.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, so like everything about the game, from the presentation to the way it plays. Now, granted, I might be a poor judge for this. I think it plays well, but the truth is I do not have a great gaming PC, and my Steam struggles to handle anything that goes harder than, say, Dunk Dunk. So it was very choppy for me. I had to keep turning down the quality, which I hated to do. But, Playtonic does say they're releasing a performance patch that will make it more stable and also have Steam Deck capability that won't crash. I don't know if they've already done this or not. You would have to tell me.
Well, I can exactly tell you, Hyle, because I can confirm to you as of the date of this recording, which is June 12th, 2025, 6:22 p.m. Mountain Time, 8:23 Eastern Time, there has been no patch for the game, for the demo just yet. And when I played the demo a couple of days back, I was warned that it can get a little hairy on Steam Deck. And that's a bit of an understatement, because you really have to go into the graphical settings and fine-tune this game in order for it to run, because this, as much as I really like this demo, and I've come out definitely more positive and optimistic about Replaylee in general, this demo... I do feel simultaneously that this demo should not have been released as is, because it is very poorly optimized. Trying to play this on a Steam Deck, there's a lot of problems. Just trying to access the demo itself caused maybe 3 or 4 crashes before I was able to properly boot to the intro cutscene. And even after that, if you don't, again, fiddle around with the graphics and resolution in the settings, you will be treated to 1 to 2 frames of 1 to 2 frames per second in this demo, which essentially makes the game unplayable.
I was going to say,
its current state.
I was going to say, I'm not really, technically minded when it comes to this kind of stuff, but that seems poor.
It's extremely poor.
Yeah.
Not only that, but we do have some other Idaho crew members who did play the demo on their own PCs, both Cameron and Dustin. And if I recall correctly, Cameron did have a demo crash on her PC at least once, and Dustin did suffer a lot of stuttering and some frame drops here and there while playing on his. And so it really is a shame, and I definitely understand if somebody walks away from this demo being frustrated and even a bit negative on it, on how it is, because they were simply not able to play it. And that's what hurts about it, because it's kind of a shame that this demo wasn't the best it could be, so it could really impress everyone.
Yeah. I mean, they really should have worked out the kinks beforehand. I don't know if this was a rush job. Part of me is thinking it wasn't, because I could see them wanting to get the demo out this week, being the 1-year anniversary of its announcement, and also it was just the traditional E3 week. So, this is their way of having Yooka-Replaylee available out there. There's also the Steam whatever event going on. So there's lots of reasons to get it out, not just putting out the PR fire. But at the same time, maybe they would have had more people to test it out if they hadn't let them go. I don't know. I'm not there. I can't speak to any true experience for the situation. But yeah, besides the herky-jerkiness of the demo, it felt good to me. Granted, I like the way the original Yooka-Laylee plays. I've said it's kind of hard to jump back to Banjo-Kazooie, the original Banjo-Kazooie, after I play Yooka-Laylee, because Yooka-Laylee, even though it does do some things a little bit wonky, it just feels so crisp and so intuitive for me, compared to Banjo-Kazooie, which, granted, it's comparing a game from 2017 to a game from 1998, but I mostly live in the realm of games from the late 90s, so for me to say that at all, I think speaks well to the original Yooka-Laylee. But I thought this controlled great when I, could actually control it. And I don't want to spoil everything for anybody who hasn't yet picked it up, or is anybody who's just waiting for the full release, but there are some legitimate surprises here that delighted me as a fan of Yooka-Laylee and Playtonic. And even the comedy, even the humor actually made me laugh, which is something that the original Yooka-Laylee never really did. I didn't find it funny. I didn't understand some of the things that seemed to have the cadence of humor. I was like, is that a joke? Am I supposed to be laughing here? What is the intent? What am I supposed to be feeling, Yooka-Laylee? But there was clear jokes, and I found them funny.
I think one of the main problems that the original Yooka-Laylee has in terms of some of its comedy and the story itself is the fact that it was very much written in 2015 during the Kickstarter, pretty fresh off of a lot of these people having been laid off and fired, from Rare because of Microsoft. And, obviously they still carried a lot of baggage into the development of the game itself, unbeknownst to anyone that, a lot of tides were already starting to turn and change at Rare, This was only a couple of months before, Rare Replay would be revealed and Sea of Thieves. And then even 2 years later, when the game releases in 2017, now that Rare Replay had been released and Sea of Thieves had already been a couple years into its alpha and was already having showcases at E3 and had people getting hands-on, the fact that, it seemed like there were very few tweaks to the story between when it was written in 2015 and when it was released. By the time we still had the game and we had a lot of that humor, obviously not to say that they weren't justified, because, at the time they were completely justified, obviously, essentially having, what was to that point their whole career at this one studio just upended. Yeah, I'd be pissed off too. I'd want to take out some aggression as well. Unfortunately, a lot of the tides had already started to turn with how people felt about Rare. People were feeling better about the company, that they were putting out games again, that they had upcoming projects, And so for this game to kind of, its main crux to be like, hey, aren't these corporations and this buyout, isn't that shitty? Don't you miss the old us? And it kind of ended up being like, well, yeah, we do still miss the old you, but at the same time, the new stuff isn't too bad anymore.
Yeah.
And it sort of put everything in an awkward position.
Yeah, it was like, we're still going on about nuts and bolts, really? Didn't all of you work on nuts and bolts? What's happening? Yeah, it was a little bit of that for sure. And even beyond just the little jabs that were in the game, just some of the jokes were very insular, and it felt like they were in-jokes that nobody else would understand. And it's like, oh, you forgot to make this accessible. Oh, okay. But here, not to give it away, but there's a fart joke. And we all love a fart joke. And it was a pretty good fart joke, all things considered, for fart jokes.
I can't think of anything funnier than a fart joke. That's top humor. If you can put a fart joke in anything, that's comedy gold. It's comedy 101 at that point. But, I think one of the biggest strengths, especially of this demo, obviously, the narrative itself, just even from the opening, that there is very little reference to that original script.
Yeah.
And I think it's honestly for the best. Obviously, again, it was written in 2015. At the time, everything was fresh, and so I get it, even if by the time it came out in 2017 it was already outdated, but I think it was very smart on their part to essentially get rid of all of those references essentially to the buyout and the feeling animosity towards all that stuff, because it kind of doesn't stick anymore. And so to make it to change the story in that way and have sort of a bit of a different reason that Capital B and Dr. Quack have, I think it's for the best, and it definitely makes the story more approachable instead of it kind of feeling like an awkward, oh, this is beef. This is beef that I don't know about.
Yeah. And yeah, like you alluded to it, but there's even a new rationale for collecting pages from Capital B's perspective, where Capital B is kind of letting this play out a little bit because he wants Yooka-Replaylee to collect the pages, and then he's just gonna, like, use those pages to repower the one book. And it just little tweaks here and there that make the story so much more eloquent and, like, hang together as a cohesive whole.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Hyle, because I would say it's less Capital B and more Dr. Quack. And this is another thing that I really like that I've been talking about with how differently they choose to approach these characters this time around. Because I feel that another thing in the original Yooka-Replaylee, I feel like despite the fact that there's a couple of good, there's a couple of funny jabs with Dr. Quack about how he's useless or he's just a complete suck-up. But, obviously when you go that hard into the joke being just that in the first game, it kind of ends up really not having much of a character other than he sucks, and as a result, Dr. Quack is very underdeveloped, essentially. He's nothing more than just one long-running gag.
Mm-hmm.
But what I really love about this demo is that it's completely different. Dr. Quack has such a personality, and I don't think we've really mentioned the cutscenes. Like, all the characters have such a great personality here. Like, the direction of the cutscenes even is something that is so much a step above the original Yooka-Replaylee. You've got Capital B making all these funny faces just constantly during these cutscenes, and how he's, like, just reacting in real time. You've got that with Yooka-Replaylee and Dr. Quack also. And, like, Dr. Quack's personality is, like, yeah, he's still a little bit bumbling and a suck-up, but, like, there's definitely a bigger plan that Dr. Quack has, and it almost seems like he's a little bit more in control than even Capital B is at this point,
I know, like, without getting into original game spoilers, that was kind of a twist towards the end of the original Yooka-Replaylee that maybe Dr. Quack is a little bit more in charge or has a bigger grand plan than even Capital B knows. And yeah, to have that, like, seeded earlier and to, like, have it be more part of their dynamic, it's much appreciated. It doesn't really just come out of nowhere this time around.
Yeah, and, like, Dr. Quack in these cutscenes, he's a little cunning. He's a little catty. Like, it's a personality he didn't have in the original, and I love that. It's such a good upgrade for a character that really didn't do anything but basically be a joke.
I would say that aside from Trouser and maybe some of the bosses, so many of the characters in the original didn't have much in the way of personalities. And that's something that was rectified with Impossible Lair or Cracklestone. I keep going back to those two, but those are the two projects that made me realize, oh, I can like these characters as more than just stand-ins, as more than just empty shells.
There's a lot of unfilled potential with these characters that's finally being recognized by these side projects, and now even, like, going back into the first project and rectifying that, You're putting what they learned from the last two things before they even existed, and you're adding that retroactively to make it a better story overall.
Let me rephrase, because there was a character who did have a good personality in the original Yooka-Replaylee. The problem was everything that they represented sucked. and that's Rextro. And Rextro, we love Rextro, we love the guy, but his arcade games were just the worst. And tacked on at the end of this demo is one level from Rextro Bites Back, which is the big new feature that a lot of us were excited about back in February. Still excited about now. What do you think about Rextro Bites Back?
This mode is essentially like the Captain Toad treasure tracker for Yooka-Replaylee. And this was the one thing that, despite my hesitance on a lot of the way that Yooka-Replaylee has been presented in the past year, this was the one thing that I definitely latched onto that gave me a big, oh, this completely changes the game, you know? This is something that's not only just like better than what they did in the original, but it adds so much more to the package that you have this little mini game from this, you know, well-meaning but amateurish character, and you really get a sense that like this is a game developed by Rextro. You know, you know what it reminds me the most of? It reminds me of Hero Klungo Saves the World from Nuts and Bolts. It's Rextro making a game about, you know, him becoming a video game hero, just like Klungo. Yeah.
And I found it pretty fun. I mean, obviously we only got the, like, I guess the first level of it, but it was charming, it was enjoyable, and it was leagues better than what we got with the original game.
I'm not using a top-down Kartos minigame and having to play it again despite the fact that I had already gotten the best time. It is leagues above any of the mini games that were presented in the original Yooka-Replaylee, and I couldn't be more excited to play these games this time around. Like, once this game comes out, that's definitely going to be like one of the more exciting parts, you know, kind of talking about how it's a little bit sad that like I don't really have to look forward to learning new moves from Trouser. But, you know, in that place, I can be like, oh, I'm in a new world. I have to go find Rextro right now and, you know, play the next level of Rextro Bites Back.
Yeah.
That's something to look forward to.
It makes the whole experience, or it will make the whole experience. We kind of got it out of context here, but it will make the whole experience of Yooka-Replaylee feel much more inviting and less bifurcated and less of a hassle, less of a chore. That's what those Rextro games were, especially the fact that no matter how well you did the first time, you'd always have to play it that second time. And they were just mostly slogs that took you out of the gameplay of Yooka-Replaylee into these, like, watered down genre knockoffs that really had no place in the game. And this just feels like something that if you are a fan of 3D platforming, this is a little bit different, but it's still in that arena. It's still in that kind of sphere of interest. And it's fun. It's, you know, very light puzzler. And yeah, like, my only regret, my only lament is the fact that we know some of the people who were laid off had a hand in Rextro Bites Back. And I remember talking about it with Cameron and saying, like, yeah, this is a spin-off potential. Like, we could have a whole game of this. And now it's just like, well, why bother? You know.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, just like Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, this could have resulted in a spin-off game that's just completely only this type of game. And I think that would have been an absolutely, like, wonderful low-budget game to get out, you know?
Yeah.
Because you'd already have the assets, you know, obviously you'd probably have to make some new assets and make the game longer, but, like, at the same time, you'd have a lot of pre-existing assets. It would keep budget down. You'd probably be able to get it out in like a year to a year and a half, like, and
or less. Yeah, it's
and even as a smaller package, you could maybe charge a little less to make sure that more people can get their hands on it and download it and play it. And and you've got you did it. You got another game out after that. And in record time. Yeah, I know. But yeah, just like knowing that Daily and so many other people that we know and love, obviously just put so much effort into these games and this mode. And now to know that like the kind of, really there's not really a future for a game like Rextro Bites Back now because they're gone. The people that championed this are just gone. Or, I guess as the Rextro minigame would say, they were the champions of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I mean, I love that pun. But in a live stream, Bayan, the bear, says, I liked the original Rextro games. Just gotta spend 100 plus hours across 13 playthroughs to learn all the kinks.
It's similar to Star Fox Zero. Once you get the hang of it after, say, the first 15 to 20 hours, then you can really learn to appreciate the small bits of it.
Ban does clarify Rextro Bites Back sweeps the originals. Yeah. I don't think we are taking you at face value there, of course.
Only talk to me after you've played 20 hours of Flappy Bird in Rextro's arcade, please. Look, then you can appreciate what these games have to offer.
I'm something of a masochist, and not just with video games. I like pain, because it brings me pleasure. But you know some of the shit I get up to in video games. How I played Pokemon, leveling up my Pokemon one at a time, getting them to level 100, and then moving on to catch the next Pokemon. It's utterly depraved, right? I punish myself for no reason. And even then, the original Rextro games were too much for me. I was like, this is just, I like pain, but this is just being kicked in the groin repeatedly. I don't like this kind of pain. So, love Rextro Bites Back. Love what they've done with it. I'm just confronted by the gaping hole in front of us of what could have been.
It's okay if you even like the original mini games from Rextro. Like, CBT isn't for everyone, it's not really a thing for most people, but if it's your thing, that's perfectly fine. Everyone enjoys a little bit of CBT every now and then.
Conker's Pocket Tales. Okay.
Yes.
I thought you were I was like, is this some drug I don't know about that you get at the vape store? Like CPT.
Yeah, obviously CPT, as in Conker's Pocket Tales, and the prelude of all the box puzzles you have in that game, Yeah. It really sharpens the mind.
Traveler of the Stars says quite bleakly, glad Playtonic got their use out of Daily and others before ditching them. Yeah, we have some calls to take, and I feel like Traveler is gonna get a word in edgewise here. So I didn't solicit calls for this, but we did get a couple calls over the past few weeks concerning Playtonic, and considering this is the time we're spending talking about the situation, I thought, even though this is a live episode and I don't always play calls on live episodes, I'll break format a little bit and devote a little bit of time to calls. Now, 3 of these calls are Traveler, and I've lumped them together as one call for the benefit of everyone. And we'll play that one first. We'll hear what you had to say about the situation, Traveler. We'll have a good cry, I have a feeling. You ready?
Yep.
Okay, let's go.
Hey, Hyle and co-host. I'm calling about Playtonic. No Conversation episode has been announced for them, but given the recent news, I kind of wanted to talk about it. no chipper traveler stars today. You look great though, both of you. So first of all, I want to say that this call is not meant to be me dooming and glooming or saying it's all over. They're Nintendo doomed or Playtonic doomed or whatever. Nothing like that. But given the recent layoffs, and if this is for like a hype Yooka-Replaylee discussion, sorry if this is like a thick knife to the hype, but I think if you probably already acknowledged it, Hyle, but I felt like I wanted to call. So I made a post on the DKVM forum, actually made a thread or whatever, a page about it, kind of just about the future of the studio. And again, I'm not dooming or glooming, but I do think it's fair to have an open and frank discussion. You know, the Tencent deal has been talked about a lot already, and I don't want to relitigate everything, but I think everyone can agree that I kind of basically made a deal with the devil, so to speak, right? I mean, they got influxes of cash. That's great, but it's Tencent. They're probably one of the leading examples of Satan, the company, right? So I feel like if they made that deal, they should not have had to have redundancy, like, you know, you're a champion of these X-Rare devs, Hyle, and, you know, champion their people and stuff like that. But that's just in my skin crawl. Redundancies, that they use that term. Yeah, redundancies? What does that even mean? Like, you have all this money. Why are there redundancies? And then, you know, they've only had 2 in-house projects, and the first one, for whatever reason, you know, Yooka-Replaylee, it did not catch the world on fire. Whether it's unfairly or not, I think we can say, you know, most people did not think it was a very stellar game. And that was hitting when there was, you know, 3D platformers had a lull, basically, right? That was even before Odyssey came out. Yeah, it was before Odyssey. And then their second game, which is great. I've actually played Impossible Lair, Hyle. It is a great game, but hardly anyone played it. And now there's Replaylee. And I understand they kind of want to revitalize the Yooka-Laylee brand for Tooka-Laylee, but I don't know. I don't want to delve too deep into the what if waters, and again, be doomer or anything like that. But I'm just worried how the future of the company will shake out. You know? I don't know. I understand Replaylee can move for Tooka, but also, like, will it attract new players? I don't know. How much of the structure of the game will be different? I don't know. Will Tooka-Laylee have a lot of the bridges been burned already? I don't know. And again, I'm not trying to, for the 4th time, I'm not trying to be doomer and gloomer here, but I don't know. I really don't know what the future of the brand will be. And hypothetically, what if the games don't, you know, hypothetically, you know, they've been doing Playtonic friend stuff and people were assuming, oh, they've been doing well, they've been able to do that. But then they have these redundancies, even if the Tencent cash. And I'm just like, what? How does that, it's like when Microsoft let go, or shut down Tango Gameworks. It's like, well, what are you doing? That makes no sense for what you were saying. I don't know. It's a weird look. It's a bad look beyond just like layoffs. It's a bad look that like Playtonic, you've done nothing in-house for years, and now you're letting people go because of redundancies. I'm just like, what? What does that mean? And then I worry that, yeah, what if Tencent invests more into them, or even just the amount they have now, and, you know, maybe their other projects don't do as well. Again, I don't know how they'll do, but I'm just concerned about the future of Playtonic. Hopefully, they will do good. And, you know, I wish them the best, but I don't know. I just wanted to get all that out. I'll talk to you guys later. Hey, I'm just following up on Hyle's recent article today. I'm confirming some more details about the whole Playtonic situation, just as an addendum to my previous call. That's true about that a lot of this is happening due to the powers that be at Playtonic wanting aggressive expansion or whatever. They have a lot to answer for. I mean, with that Tencent deal and this, I mean, what is going on? You know, I really, this is the type of crap I expect from like other, like an EA or an Activision, not Playtonic, who, let's face it, They only put out 2 in-house games. One of them was kind of middling for a lot of people. Another one was good, but I wouldn't say it warrants them acting like this. I mean, nothing does, but I mean, come on, what the hell?
Well, thank you for
There's
the
a lot to unpack there, but thank you for the call.
Thank you for the calls and the righteous indignation. And I don't know if I misread this, that you were concerned that I wouldn't also be feeling something other than, no, Playtonic's doing great. What are you like, I know I am like glass half full, especially when it comes to this. And part of that is because I'm the person who's been saying, no, Nintendo's working on Donkey Kong. Trust me, for like 8 years. Which, by the way, they were. So, okay. But, I know I have that reputation, but I can also call shit out when I see it, as a real human being, seeing other real human beings getting affected. Like back in 2014, it's part of the seasons of the Kongversation we have sent to the hinterlands we've sent it to the cornfield, but in 2014, when the Rare layoffs happened, I went off on Rare and Rare management. I was not happy.
You went off on everything. I remember that episode of the Kongversation. You two held nothing back. You went after Microsoft. You went after Rare. It was a very bad time for the DKU, but that was a very raw episode. And, obviously we're doing this about 2 weeks post, layoffs. But I'm sure if we had recorded something around that time, there would maybe be a little bit more fire and more us being more obviously upset. But, there's been a lot to digest since then, and, there's a lot of factors at play. A lot of not great factors. And, I do want to touch on some of the things mentioned in Traveler of the Stars call, and, I do want to be a bit fair, because obviously I definitely agree that the word redundancies, probably one of the shittiest words that you can use with layoffs, like redundancies. Like you are useless to us now. Goodbye, thank you.
You're basically like you're the spleen. You're the spleen. We don't really need you. We're just gonna cut you out. Yeah,
you can be the left kidney. We can survive without you.
You're a vestigial tail on my backside. And you know what? Dixie Kong doesn't need hers, so we're gonna remove you.
Obviously there's a lot to mention about the potential poor management of Playtonic and whether or not they should have tried expanding so fast in the first place. But I do want to give some credit and say that not everything that has gone wrong with Playtonic has been a result of poor management, because I think there are 2 things that hurt Playtonic more than they thought it would hurt them. And the first thing we've already mentioned was the global pandemic. It's hard to believe that 5 years ago we had a global pandemic that started and lasted lasted for most people for 2.5 years. To some, obviously it's still going. It's never gonna completely go away, but that didn't just affect Playtonic. It affected everyone in the world. It affected all video games. It affected Nintendo and EPD to make Donkey Kong Bonanza. It affected Playtonic, obviously, to make and get out more games faster. It affected Microsoft and Rare to get, more out with Everwild and Sea of Thieves. And so we already know that, development stalled on a lot of things while they tried to essentially create more remote work for video games so that stuff could continue. And even after that, what should be relatively smooth sailing, we have another huge pillar that I think a lot of people forget about just 2 years ago, and that was the implosion of Unity. I mean, Unity was the engine that Playtonic was using for all their games. And so for Unity as a company to essentially implode upon itself and kind of fuck over every single developer, indie developer or non-indie developer that was using it. Like, you know, you mentioned only 2 games being released. Like, I can tell you that they were probably more games than just Replaylee in development, but those games, unfortunately, probably had to start over because Playtonic didn't feel confident that they could trust Unity as an engine anymore after all of that shit went down, you know? They didn't feel comfortable with having their games in that engine, which I think is probably also a reason why Replaylee exists in a sense, because not only is it in order to like make up for the shortcomings of the original, but I would say it's also to test out a new engine in the Unreal Engine after Unity just, you know, is kind of no question they can't use it anymore. So not only do they have to remake the first Yooka-Laylee in Unreal, they have to make all their other projects in Unreal Engine as well that they were working on that were in Unity. And I can't imagine how much you have to throw away or how little you could like scrape or salvage from those projects that were in development for, you know, nearly 3 years at that point. It must be devastating.
Yeah, and that's a good point, and we don't really have the full picture. We have bits and pieces, and we can kind of start to weave together a tapestry, but we still don't know all the decisions that were made that led them to this point. Now, we do have accusations being made on social media from former Playtonic staffers, which we'll get into in just a bit, and I think there's a lot of validity to that, especially because they were on the inside. I will say that, yeah, there were a lot of bad hands that had been dealt in the last 5 years. But that being said, to Traveler's point, there is the fact that, yeah, they made the Tencent deal after the worst days of the pandemic. And yeah, Unity happened, but you know, my philosophy, and this is why I'm a very poor capitalist, but my philosophy is above all else, you protect your people. You protect your employees, and you don't overextend yourself if it means your employees are at risk. And unfortunately, we're living in an age where employees are the first on the chopping block, no matter what. But you know, I keep circling back to the new studio space, the new headquarters. Is that really necessary? Or is that something they wanted? Is that something they felt would make them more successful? And then it ended up biting them in the ass.
It's one thing to want to expand. You know, obviously that should be the natural inclination of any studio to expand and be a bigger studio so you can tackle more projects. But obviously it almost feels like there were a lot of smaller things during the expansion that they were maybe a bit frugal on, like, you know, obviously having multiple different locations and maybe a bit bigger than they should have gone. And yeah. I honestly, like, if anything, I know there's been a lot of talk still, especially recently, about the Tencent deal and was this good for Playtonic? And obviously we don't know everything about that deal. We don't know the exact details. We don't know the nitty gritty. But I feel like, honestly, I'm not sure if this would be maybe a hot take, but I don't feel like the Unity infusion is really something to be looked at as bad. In fact, I think for a little bit, the Tencent infusion.
Yeah, you're mixing up your villains here.
There's so many. No, I feel like in the case of this, that Tencent is kind of the least worrisome part because, you know, obviously we could maybe find out something later about the Tencent shareholders in Playtonic wanting more results or whatever, but I feel like Tencent only kind of helped Playtonic during that brief pandemic era where they were struggling. In fact, I think it may have been a reason why they maybe didn't run into some harsher realities sooner, is because they did get that big Tencent infusion, which allowed them to not only stay afloat a little bit more, but, also to expand more people, especially to hire, obviously the now laid off people that, finally were able to come in and, protege for a while.
Yeah, I do think Tencent makes for a convenient scapegoat or a convenient baddie, because we all want somebody to blame. Just like how we all blamed Microsoft for all of Rare's problems post-buyout. And the truth was, it wasn't always Microsoft to blame, and it was a lot of self-inflicted wounds, or it was just stuff out of their control. It was the evolving nature of the industry that they couldn't keep up with, but it wasn't baddie Microsoft, putting their boot to the neck of poor Rare. Oh, if only Nintendo had bought them, things would be different. Even though, trust me, I'm no fan of Tencent, but I'm also able to look at it like, well, Tencent might have actually been advantageous for them. It was just other factors, including hubris, that got them to this point. And, I don't know how much of it is hubris or how much of it was wishful thinking. I don't think wanting to grow and expand and having big dreams is a bad thing. It should be lauded. Anybody who has any drive will be operating on that. But you also, if you're going to hire somebody, I feel like that the priority then is to keep them above all else and watch the budget, and make sure that you're not going to run into problems only 5 months into your new headquarters. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It shouldn't be. It's great that we have this person so that if things go wrong, we can easily get rid of them and we won't be any worse off for it. It should be, this person is now integral to this company, which is why we hired them. And if anything bad were to happen, these people, need to be protected at all costs. They need to make sure that they are safe and that anything that could potentially happen, that, it's the people at top that need to, sort of take the risks and have, what happens to them. They sort of have to put themselves in front and face the consequences, and not the people that, are trying to help them.
Yeah, it's probably a fallacy to expect management to tighten their belts in this day and age, but yeah, that's what you do. Look, I'm probably the worst person to be speaking on business matters. Again, I run what can be charitably described as a micro business, which involves a lot of fretting over my budget and figuring things out. But bottom line is, I don't overextend myself, because if I do, then that's the end of DK Vine, So it is just yes, I would love a big, lavish, workspace for what I do, but I'm also content to work out of an attic if I can keep things humming along. And we're coming out of this post-pandemic era where work from home became normalized. Remote work became part of the fabric of how we get things done. And I just don't understand why, things like this new studio was integral. I know there's a difference when everybody's in the same space. You can spitball easier, but is it necessary? Especially when you're going to lose something like 30% of your staff. Then I would say no. What's more important are the people who are making this happen, not where they're going to be confined or what roof is going to be over their head.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's obvious to a lot of people that if a company is struggling, then it should be the people at the top, the executives, the CEOs. They should definitely be taking the consequences instead of the people under them, you know. Obviously, so every company is a far cry. I mean, even, you know, as much as I love them still, even Nintendo today, you know, would say Shuntaro Furukawa do what Satoru Iwata did in the 2010s, in the mid to late 2010s when Nintendo was doing badly? Would he also cut his salary just like Iwata? Would he take the blame for the failure of the Switch 2 if all of a sudden sales tanked on that? You know, we don't know, you know. I mean, thankfully we don't have to wonder and know, because, you know, that's not a great thing for any company. But, you know, obviously you don't have Satoru Iwata's running every business, you know. You don't have people like that always thinking about how they can always protect the people that work for them. You know, sometimes you do get people who, even if they mean well, still have some selfishness in them that would rather see other people that aren't them suffer instead of them themselves.
Yeah, it's Jack Welch. Look it up. He ruined the notion of what business is. He was the CEO of GE in the 80s, and he completely single-handedly almost introduced the notion of growth, continual growth. You know, every quarter, what are our numbers? They got to go up. Number go up, smiley face. And it wrecked GE, but it set the precedent for every other major company to follow this model. And instead of taking care of employees, instead of places being institutions where people could spend their entire career and continue to, you know, get raises every year and have that job security, all of a sudden everything was disposable. And I'm not necessarily saying that Playtonic is as bad as Jack Welch of GE, but like, I think it's the same philosophy, that hubris of we want to be as big as Rare was back in the day. We want to have this pedigree of having this like footprint in the English Midlands, and we want to be seen as a success. Well, you know, maybe get there first. Don't try to take shortcuts. Late stage capitalism has come for us all. We do have another call to take. Traveler, we're going to circle back to some of your points as we wrap this up with our final thoughts. But, yeah, thank you for the calls. I hope we were firm and fair in our responses.
I think it was a good call. I think we had a lot of good discussion out of that. So once again, thank you so much, Traveler of the Stars.
Hey, Hyle, this is Carlnax. I'm calling in very briefly for the live conversation that is dealing in parts with the layoffs at Playtonic. I think a lesson to take away from this, or at least to reinforce, is that even if we like have like special like relationships with the companies, we like the people who work on them, and we have like a connection to the things they've made in the past, that doesn't mean that they are like separate or removed from like the wider problems in like the game industry. They aren't separate from like company cultures where cutting costs, the first resort is to like lay off staff, and they're definitely not removed from any like financial incompetence, which might have been part of the reason why a move to a big studio was something Playtonic was doing, and that like caused a lot of extra costs to pile up. And I realize you've expressed discomfort about covering this in the past, which I totally understand. It's not the sort of thing that you want to talk about in a fun little Donkey Kong related podcast. But I'm glad that you're getting around to it. I think it's worth like keeping in mind. Gaming companies, some are definitely better than others. I don't think Playtonic or Nintendo or anything are any worse than like
saying that they're like no different from like an Activision or Ubisoft is willfully ignorant in my view, but we do need to call them out when they do bad stuff, and we can't put them on a pedestal in our mind just because we like their games. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the call. And again, I don't want to make it seem like we're coming after everyone still at Playtonic as if it's a shared fault or that they are worthy of blame just because they did not become unemployed.
Yeah, we know from a matter of fact that there are plenty of senior staff at Playtonic that are very upset about this, you know.
Yeah.
Even as going as far to say as this was not necessary. This did not need to happen. Yeah. You know, these people should not have been this expendable.
That's right. That's right. So, like, when I talk about Playtonic, it's not necessarily even the institution that I'm talking about. It is generally the people. Same with Rare, you know, less so with Nintendo, just because it's a little bit more, harder to get a read on Nintendo. But with Rare and Playtonic, so many of those people have become real to us in the last, over a decade, but like there are people at both studios that I've gotten to know, that I have befriended, and there are people I have, you know, acquaintances with who, like, I don't know them well, but I still interact with them quite a bit, and I don't think in terms of just the corporate umbrella branding. I think of the people who make those institutions work. And that is why this is so heartbreaking, because we just lost 17 of those people who make Playtonic work. And it sucks.
Especially talking about your knowing people at each company. Hyle, you have quite literally walked the halls of Manor Park. You have been inside Rare.
Yeah. So it's hard for me to remain objective, you know, and I don't think I should. Like in this case, it's real people losing their jobs, real people who made up so much of the creative bandwidth that brought these games to life. And yeah, like, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the irony of all of this, of layoffs at a studio that was formed due to the 2014 layoffs at Rare. I mean, it's just a sick Ouroboros at this point. This snake is just going to town on itself, as I imagine Trouser would do. But in this case, it's not funny. It's not even a little sexy. It's just repulsive. I've often called the 2014 layoffs the original sin of the Renaissance era, that period that we define as kind of this resurgence, this reclamation of what Rare was, but also just the love that people have for the games at Rare. Like, so everything from Sea of Thieves and Rare Replay at Rare to the founding of Playtonic. It's something I can never condone, those layoffs in 2014, but I do admit it did lead to some positive developments eventually. Mostly the founding of Playtonic, but also arguably you could say that evolution that Rare experienced could not have happened had they not had that round of layoffs, that sort of forest fire that led to new growth. And I hate talking in those terms because it's gross, but I do think Rare needed to kind of enter a new phase. They were stuck. They were perpetually stuck. And the layoffs did lead to good things on both ends. Doesn't mean, like, if I could go back, I would just let them have, like, it's not me saying, yeah, layoffs are great. These layoffs are great. These people are going to go on to do great things. It doesn't always.
It's great that people have lost their job. There's nothing to worry about.
It doesn't always wind up like that. In the case of the 2014 layoffs, it was a stroke of good fortune that it just led to good things for both studios. You know, it could have gone very, very badly.
You know, obviously, to your point, if we could go back and change it, like, yeah, I probably would change it despite the good that's happened, because, like, you know, something like Playtonic, you know, it was never like a done deal. It was never a sure thing. You know, things could have easily fallen apart faster, or, you know, I mean, you know, there's a lot of sentiment with a lot of, because, you know, this isn't just Playtonic. It's so much more that the gaming industry is going through right now. It is bad to be in the gaming industry. Lots more people are losing their jobs, and it sucks. It's really bad, you know?
Yeah. And, like, that's why I'm, like, I had righteous anger back in 2014. And this time around, and maybe it's just the state of the world and where we're just at as a society, but I just don't even have the capacity for anger right now. Maybe a little bit of anger, but I'm just feeling sad about this. And I don't see those Playtonic layoffs as, like, ever being construed as, well, a necessary evil, but look at what all the good it has led to. Like, it's not like this laid off workforce. I saw some jokes about it in a live stream chat, but it's not like they're going to band together to form yet another Splinter Studio, you know, with, we're doing, I don't know, xylophone,
and like, I mean,
brass section E.
To go back to what Travel of the Stars mentioned, you know, when talking about how upsetting it is to use words like redundancies, and even the example of Tango Gameworks, I think that's a great example. Here you have this fantastic studio under Xbox and Microsoft, and they just released, like, one of the most well-regarded exclusives up until that point that Xbox has almost ever had for, like, a good long while. Like, their first original game that people really love, that's getting critical praise, that's winning them awards. And how do they get the repayment, despite the fact that during the months of release and all these awards, and everyone at the studio saying, yes, the game's selling really well, it's doing great, everything feels good at Tango Gameworks. It all just vanishes one day when Phil Spencer decides that Activision Blizzard is much more important as a merger, so that because they've now wasted nearly $5 billion on this merger, that they cannot afford to have as many studios as before. So, goodbye, Tango Gameworks. Thank you for helping push the Xbox brand forward. You're no longer needed. I'm not going to take a salary pay cut, but all of you will no longer have jobs. Goodbye.
Yeah, and it's only going to get worse from here with AI, and it's just a fucking miserable time, isn't it? Oh, and, like, beyond just, like, worrying about those laid off, this undoubtedly hurts Playtonic because they lose all of that creative talent, and they also lose a bit of standing in the public eye and the hope that the fans of Playtonic had for the future of the studio. And, you know, Rare rebounded. You brought this up, how, like, a year later, like, Rare had basically reversed the narrative from those layoffs, and people were excited about Rare again. Can Playtonic rebound from this? Well, sure, eventually, if Yooka-Replaylee is released to rave reviews, and they actually, you know, follow up on that momentum. This could just be one dark chapter of an otherwise long, fruitful history that has yet to be written for the studio. And, you know, this is me, glass half full, but, you know, it's possible that these bad vibes that are permeating the hardcore Playtonic fandom right now, maybe that's not going to reach outward to the people who will actually buy the game. Maybe this is just the insular bubble of the extremely online, the niche of the niche that are feeling this way right now. And maybe Yooka-Replaylee will be a success when it comes out, and management will learn and grow from this experience.
Obviously it's difficult because, I still want Playtonic to succeed, It's, a lot of things, yes, have been a partial blame of, yes, management mishandled a lot of things. They maybe spent a little when they shouldn't have. They, didn't need as big of an office. They didn't need multiple locations. They didn't need to do this in terms of the way they should have expanded. And, at the same time, I do want to believe that they could technically bounce back, because anything is possible. But, obviously, knowing that Playtonic has already struggled post the original Yooka-Laylee, even with something as good and lauded as Impossible Layer that showed that they are capable of really bouncing back and taking feedback. It still didn't necessarily help sales, because people, whether it be people burnt from the original Yooka-Laylee that just didn't want to give it a second chance, or say they weren't really too invested in the series after that, after sort of just being let down. It's not necessarily something to blame on them, but, obviously taking to account this demo, which should have been a great thing to help excite people and maybe get more eyes on it. Also kind of, a demo itself for a video game that's unreleased. That's a risky thing to do, to just put out there, because if that demo doesn't do well, people will just, if people don't like that demo, they'll decide, well, I didn't like the demo, so I probably won't like the full game. And so you're still putting you're putting a lot at risk in terms of game sales, even, because it's how many people maybe, despite the fact that it's a good demo, are probably not going to buy the game now just because of how poorly optimized it is, and they don't want to stand by waiting for a patch to fix it, when something like this should have been very carefully released to begin with, not so haphazardly. So, it's a tough thing, because how do you even go about selling what's essentially a remake of a game people didn't already like, that's still sort of having issues around it?
Yeah, I'm sure the final product will be polished, and it's just a matter of will word of mouth be good? Will the promotion be good? I think a lot of where Impossible Layer was let down was the shoddy promotion it received, and people being confused about what the game actually was, which is part of the reason I feel Playtonic ditched Team 17 and went with a new studio PM. But
I definitely get that. At the same time, I do want to be fair. Obviously there were a lot more issues at play with Team 17 and how they promoted things. While at the same time, we will probably just about to enter this discussion, I don't necessarily think Playtonic has done that amazing of a job in promoting Replaylee themselves. I feel like there have been a lot of obvious stumbles that could have been avoided with more careful planning, that they're kind of just sideshow bobbing up here. They are stepping on a lot of rakes on the way to this release that they could have easily avoided.
It doesn't help that they have just lost, who, by the way, he left before the layoffs, but it doesn't help that they just lost their, community manager effectively, and they really have nobody putting out a coherent message right now. And I want to talk a little bit about this. So Steve James, he has been one of the most vocal people on social media since all of this transpired, and he has just been putting it all out there, burning bridges left and right. But I mean, I admire it. So this is what he said, concerning the layoffs. I think this was after Playtonic, maybe released their statement about, oh yeah, we're so sorry we had to cut people, redundancies.
If I may use the word, their redundant statement that usually goes out maybe on the day you do layoffs, not a week and a half after layoffs do you do a redundant statement. It just makes you look a little worse that you didn't do it immediately.
So it really just ripped open the still clotting wounds for a lot of the people who are at Playtonic. Steve among them, and this is what Steve said: while many studios are struggling, it's important to note that many also continue to succeed. Blaming layoffs on the difficulties the industry is facing is a cop-out for the mistakes you have made as the manager of a company. And I was kind of skirting around who to blame. I think Steve is putting it out there. Let you read between the lines, everyone. The difficulty the industry is facing is late-stage capitalism. The difficulty is an insistence that the line must always be going up and that anything else is a failure. Take that, Jack Welch. To use that as an excuse for mismanagement feels disingenuous at best, insulting the intelligence of the people at worst. Run your company sustainably in the first place. Don't overhire to the point where you're holding back juniors for 3 years. Don't buy a flashy new studio in this climate. Release a fucking game. Own your mistakes. That would be heartfelt. And I think that is probably the most succinct explanation we will get for a good long while until the book comes out about what happened at Playtonic in May of this year. And I completely get why Steve left now. Steve was worried this was coming, and he was assured by the manager, as he calls him, that no, it's all under control. There won't be layoffs. There won't be redundancies. And Steve was like, "No, I'm out. Bye. I'm out. I'm leaving. Good luck with that." And then, sure enough, it happened. And like, I don't know how Steve would be operating if he was still there, because I imagine he wouldn't have been one of the redundancies, because you need someone running comms, right? You need someone getting a coherent message out to the public. I don't think Steve would have wanted to do it, and to be like the face of a company in disarray, but they have nobody doing it right now. And as you alluded to, it's kind of a mess at the moment. It's not even pretty to look at. I have to wince and look away. Some of the stuff they're putting out there as of late.
I mean, we already had plenty to talk about this episode, but what are the odds that this morning would prove more for us to talk about, especially in regards to the importance of, what both Steve and Daly did, in terms of like community and like social media managing? 'Cause I feel like it might be one of those things that are often very much overlooked by studios or companies. When they look at things, they're like, oh, we have people employed specifically for like posting things on Instagram and Blue Sky and TikTok. Like, can't we just do that? Isn't it easy to just promote your own stuff while also like posting online? And the answer is no, not really. And we've alluded to it through this episode, but this morning, as one of the first attempts to sort of try to right this ship that
This
has kind
batship
of
crazy.
been, yeah, this batship crazy that's been sinking for a little bit already.
It's already run
Playtonic-
aground.
Yeah, it's in the ground. There's a couple leaks. We're out of wood planks in the bottom. The hole has been breached.
This is just Sea of Thieves now. You're mixing your metaphors. Circle back.
So this morning, Playtonic themselves posted, "We have made a tier list of Yooka-Replaylee levels and went around the office asking people from our many departments to fill it out. The results are varied. What's at the top and bottom? Which is which? Join the fun." And this links to an official tier list of Yooka, the worlds and places in Yooka-Replaylee. And this is kind of the prime example of why you need someone as a community or social media manager. Because this is not the way you sell a game by saying, "Hey, look at our brand new game we want you to play. Let's tell you all the shitty stuff about it. Let's tell you the worst aspects."
Granted, yes, Moody Maze Marsh is F tier, the original Yooka-Laylee. That's fine for me to say. When you're trying to sell us your new game, maybe don't lead with that.
You see, the thing is, in itself, this is not a bad attempt, but the thing is, this is what would be in a brainstorming session where you say, all right, what's a great way to sell Yooka-Replaylee? And someone says, what if we make a tier list and we talk about the stuff we like and the stuff we hate? And then the community or social media manager would say, that's a bad idea to do that because we want our game to look good and we want people to think that everything's improved and that nothing's bad in the game. Yeah. So instead of doing that, let's instead build off of this. How about instead we rank the original Yooka-Laylee game and its worlds? And then we compare that to how we've changed things in Replaylee.
Yeah,
instead of going, hey, you know what we hate in our remake that's better? We still hate Moody Maze March. Fuck that world.
Yeah.
Don't spend too much time in this area of the game, okay? It sucks.
Yeah. Are you really looking forward to Yooka-Replaylee? Did you enjoy the demo? Well, that was the introduction of the game. By the time you reach World 3, you're gonna hate it. Yeah, it's kind of amateurish to see, and it is also insulting for anybody who worked on that world for Yooka-Replaylee who maybe doesn't work there anymore. It's like salt in the wound. And yeah, you just what? This is why it is important to have a coherent person running social media and engaging with the community. Like, I always go back to when I really got online and I discovered online Rare fandom, and Lee Loveday had just started Rareware, the Rare's official website, and Lee was the voice for Rare, for the entire studio for years. And he really helped cultivate a particular identity for Rare. And so the most hardcore, the most loyal, the most freakish Rare fans had their fandom defined by the voice and writing style of Lee Loveday. And then Playtonic had the same thing when Daily took over. I
mean, even Rare for a brief period had that when Daily took over.
Yes.
Daily was a force. I can't think of anyone else who, not only, to say helped both Rare and Playtonic, in terms of their, online persona. I think Daily has done much more than what a lot of regular people would think she did. I think she was able to make such a different discussion around these two studios and make it so that more people feel more personable to them, even more so than they did already, you know?
Yeah. Like, again, I'm feeling more just this morose funk about all of this than I am feeling anger right now. And yeah, like if I had worked for Playtonic and I saw my colleagues laid off or I had been laid off, I'm sure that anger would be there. I think I'm just too beaten down right now by everything else. I only have so much energy, but I am just feeling profoundly blue over the situation and playing the demo. My God, I was charmed. I was delighted. The magic was back. And like, I felt the demo turned around these characters and the world of Playtonic. And had the demo come out before the layoffs, or had the layoffs not happened until well after the game itself had been released, I think like everybody would just be over the moon with what they're seeing, and there wouldn't be all these caveats and asterisk next to, well, I like the demo, but it sure fucking sucks about Playtonic right now. And it's just a mess. It's just a mess. And I am not sure how management behind this understood the attachment that the most hardcore Playtonic fandom has for the people laid off. I mean, even the ones who weren't there from the start. Like we've been talking about Daily and Daily's role in shepherding social media, community engagement, and really was the one responsible for cultivating Playtonic's defined personality and brand, probably more than anyone in its history. I mean, the whole foot fetish thing, you know, like, I don't know.
Because Kazooie is always pregnant has changed online discussion.
Even though that's not technically what eggs are, I hate to be the stickler there, but just speaking from a purely like biological viewpoint, that's not what eggs are. Okay, anyway.
But it's one of those things that endeared people to the brand, you know?
Yeah.
Just being able to just flat out post something that crazy and silly just to show like, yeah, there are people behind this, you know? You need a Daily, you need a Steve, like, even thinking about, like, the bittersweetness of a lot of the stuff, like, you know, Steve was probably partially responsible for probably the art contest that it was happening for Replaylee. Mm-hmm. Even more so, probably even, like, as they chose extra people than they should have, you know? Yeah. That is the magic of being a community or like social media manager, you know? You get to sort of make some of those calls, you get to interact with these people that, you know, what normally the execs maybe aren't necessarily seeing every day. You're seeing that love, you're seeing that passion, and like that's your chance to give back, like with that like with the capital B contest.
And I think that is something that is lost for a lot of the people who are just like in the stacks all day, who are just like mired in like, oh, you know, we got these games in development with this, and the other, but they don't see the attachment and the adoration that the fans are developing for the people making the games. Not just the characters, not just the final product, but the people responsible. I mean, sometimes the price isn't always right, and you don't realize the blow that losing all of these people will have on the esteem of your studio. Playtonic's existence has so far been a net positive for both the industry and the beleaguered Rare and DKU fandom. I mean, personally speaking, Playtonic has kept me excited about games in the mold of my favorites at a time when Rare's classic IPs are just out to lunch. And they've also given a spotlight to other indie studios. Games I would have never discovered because of my weird monk-like fidelity, adherence to the DKU. I would have never found these games, these very, very small indie studios, and I would have never played something like Demon Turf or Lil Gator Game or Dunk Dunk. Dunk Dunk! New DK Vine favorite Dunk Dunk would not even be part of our language if it wasn't for Playtonic. I am immensely grateful for everything that Playtonic has given my life for the past 10 years as just a weirdo fan making podcast. And I'm sure when Yooka-Replaylee comes out, I will enjoy it. And I think now, at this time, the state of the world, I need things to enjoy. I need happy distractions like Mario Kart World has been. By the way, we are doing a Mario Kart World episode next. We're going to turn these vibes around. But I mean, my God, it's not lost on me that on what would be the traditional E3 week or the week before E3 week, depending on the year, Los Angeles is under military occupation. What the fuck is happening? We're all scared.
Many of us fucking sucks. There's no way around it. It is not good to be alive and living, you know. The best thing you can say is that you are alive, yes, but like it is we are in a very dark time in general of the annals of history.
Oh, with an emphasis on anal, let me tell you.
We are right up the anal hole. We are swimming in it right now. We are drowning.
Yes. But enough about that. We yearn for escapism. The escapism that our entertainment provides us. But even then, the cold, harsh reality of the modern world is there to remind us that money corrupts even the purest, most noble of intentions. Even the studio that was built as a fallback from the evils of cold-hearted capitalism. I guess it's true what they say. You either die a lizard and a bat, or you live long enough to see yourself become a bumblebee in a business suit.
This has been a File 2 production.
Qué rico.